Welcome to Answers That Count. If you own a business, you can count on us to give you the answers you need to succeed in all aspects of your business. And now, here's your host, Charles Musgrove.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us for another exciting episode of Answers That Count. I'm your host, Charles Musgrove, and thank you for joining us again. I am in the Tallahassee studio of Real Talk 93.3, and you know where you can find all of our other shows. We're on all your favorite podcast channels. We're on YouTube. We're on Roku Fire. We're on Amazon Fire, Roku TV. So if you go to those channels, make sure that you subscribe to us and hit the notification button so that you'll know when we post another video out there. Or if it's a podcast you're listening to, you'll get notified when we put another podcast out. So we've got to, you know what we talk about? We talk about business matters. We talk about things that are interesting about business, how to do business better. And today we got a follow-up interview with Steele Smith III from California. So Steele, thank you for joining us again. This is going to be a show like none other that we've done. We talked to you a couple of weeks ago about medical cannabis in the state of California and the new product that you're developing. It's in, as I understand it, it's in pill format, and it's a way for those taking the medication to get an exact quantity of prescription medication in the cannabis pill. Is that correct?
That's correct. Idrasil is a whole dry prescription tablet.
All right, so that is new to the cannabis industry in California, and it's something that is cutting edge, and you're taking pre-orders for that now. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, at Idrasil.com.
All right, so there you have it, Idrasil.com. Spell that for us so that we know how to find that.
Idrasil.
All right, good. So go check that out if you're interested and you live in the state of California. So Steele, as we were talking last time on the show, there were the story behind the story, I think, is just an intriguing story, and it's one that deals with hardship. And a lot of people, they rise to success. They have their most accomplished success in life that's based on a hardship or something that they have to endure in their personal life. And I think yours is your story really is epitomized by that. It's a story that involves personal pain, health tragedy that you've overcome or that you're overcoming that. And I really think that has led to your creation, your development in the cannabis industry, and that's I think one of the hallmarks and the reason that you're on the way to great success for those people that like you that really need medical cannabis to be able to endure the pain and survive the pain. So thank you for doing what you have done, the duration that you've gone through this and the creation, development of this medical cannabis. So thank you for doing that. You're going to be a godsend to a lot of people out there that need this. So as I understand it, Steele, your story begins back in 2001. So you can kind of give us a little bit of information about your educational background that happened before 2001, but I think the true story begins in 2001.
So, Charles, I'm a Orange County, California, Anaheim native, Servite High School, USC, Western State Law School. Had a great life with a little marketing company. Couple of U.S. patents on a little security device that I promoted as a marketing device, a promotional product.
So all this was before 2000.
Life was good, and by 2001, I got struck down with a very rare form of Crohn's called Zollinger-Ellison, and I was throwing up constantly. I lost 40 pounds. I was in the emergency room 2 to 3 times a week, and the doctors couldn't figure out what the problem was. And as a physician's son, this shouldn't have been a big deal. several EGD scopes and 3 ERCPs. After the last one, the doctor wakes me up in the post-op room and says, "Mr. Smith, we figured out the problem. I had gotten the scope all the way down into your duodenal section and still hadn't found any ulcers or other problems," and stood back, and he says, "I was scratching my head and I noticed that your feet were hanging off the end of the table." And I said to myself, "My gosh, this guy's super tall. I'm 6'7". And so he rolled me on my side, and as he's saying this, he hands me some papers with picture images on them from the ERCP showing 11 ulcers.
Wow.
One of them is the size of a peanut. So there they were, the cause of my pain. And while that should have been the end of the story, it really was the beginning of the story, because I was sent home with one of the strongest acid reducer medications and, of course, opioid pain medication. And that started a process of unwittingly and unknowingly becoming addicted, until day to day, in between doses, I felt the symptoms of withdrawal, and was identified as such by my doctor, that those are withdrawal symptoms. And it was the worst thing in the world. I hated it.
Man.
I absolutely hated the feeling of opioids. I had no clarity. I couldn't think. I was losing the quality of life and relationships with my friends and family, and I had to get off of them.
Yeah.
So that started a journey of, by 2004, I was in rehab. I did the blood detox program where they wash your blood, and it's a branded process, so I'm not stating it here, but anyway, it almost worked. I was on pretty high doses of morphine sulfate, and from there I had to go on to a new drug at the time called Suboxone to abate the continuing symptoms of withdrawal that I had. And for another year, I continued to break the Suboxone down into increasingly smaller pieces until one day I didn't need it anymore. Steele. From that point forward, it literally took another year before personally I felt like my sense of normalcy had returned. I like to refer to it as my compass was spinning, and it finally settled on north again.
Wow.
It's kind of the example that I like to use.
Steele, that's quite a story, and I know that we started this in 2001, and if you think back to that time period, that was before we understood the dire consequences caused by opioids, and we know more about the addiction that causes now, and the health problems that causes from opioids. So from you kind of skipped from 2001 to 2004 real quickly, like in a matter of minutes, but we know that was a lot of pain and suffering and living in the cloud of those opioids for that period of time. So I don't want to go by that without giving full acknowledgement of that. And also where we're going with this is very, very personal for you. So we understand that as observers and listening to this story, it's one thing, and it's bad to hear, but you're reliving this as you're telling us this. So we appreciate you going through this, and if you need to take a break at any time, or if you need to put on those sunshades you got by your side, feel free to do that, and we'll take a break in this. But the big picture is we know that this is basically a 19-20 year process that we're going through, that you just started in 2001, and where it ends is today, and that you look like right now that you're a functioning, healthy young man, and that you've got a lot going on in the cannabis industry, and where that hardship started in that 2001 and where it is today is going to yield a lot of good benefits for people that are suffering like you did back in 2001. So we interrupted you in 2004 as you were going through rehab. So I'm not sure how effective that rehab was. I know it was probably a pretty involved process to go through rehab as you've described it.
So here's the thing about rehab that I've really learned, and I think that God really needed to take me through the process of addiction in order to lead me to where I'm at today in the medical cannabis industry, and really medical cannabis in the pharmaceutical industry. Prescription cannabis is a modality for opioid detox that I never would have understood the mechanism of action had I not gone through it myself. So as a patient, an opioid addicted patient, I can understand how those that like opioids choose to stay addicted. There is a percentage of that population, but there's also an equal percentage of the population like myself that just doesn't like them at all. We don't tolerate them well. The whole litany of side effects. And so opioid detox is a road from addiction to cleanliness that is probably the roughest road that any person can travel down. The opioid receptors in our bodies just crave the drug when you're detoxing. And that detox is so painful that you can't get out of bed, your muscles ache, you're throwing up constantly, you can't keep food down, you're dizzy, you can't sleep, you're sweating, you're agitated. It's the worst feeling in the world.
So that is your whole life, is just living through that.
To have a full understanding and appreciation personally for those addicted to opioids and who want or need to go through the detox process, I have a very compassionate understanding for the place and role in which cannabinoids play in that process.
Right.
Suboxone is an opioid itself. It's just a very kind of weak form of opioid that is intended to abate the symptoms of severe withdrawal. So the patient is always going to go through withdrawal. They never feel good until they're completely clean. So Suboxone can either maintain a person on opioids for an extended period of time, or they can be used in the manner in which I used them, which was increasingly decreasing their use until I was at zero. And so that's a choice.
Right.
That's a choice that a person has to go through to choose to accept the
pain,
trauma and anxiety that one goes through with related opioid detox.
Right. So is there an average?
A person gets to that point, that's a choice. How much of that pain you want to accept daily on your road to zero.
Steele, what is the is there an average or a normal time period that detoxification takes?
Yes. For most people, the minimum at anything under 100 milligrams a day is 3 months.
3 months. Wow.
That's the bare minimum. before a person even can get out of bed. Then there's another 3 months of you just can't do much other than take care of yourself and really try to get yourself on the mend. But to get back to normalcy and real clarity and having that feeling of agitation truly in your past, it's a year process. And if a person was on over 100 milligrams, it's easily a year, sometimes 2 to 3 years.
Wow.
And people don't really have an appreciation for the length of that process.
So what you're developing now that you're doing pre-sales for will help those patients in that detoxification time period. Is that correct?
Yes, Idrasil is an oral form of cannabis that will help with the symptoms related to opioid detox. But honestly, for those patients that are in the throes of detox and can't even keep a drink of water down, the smoke form really is the kind of the initial panacea. And once a person gets through those initial phases of detox, other forms of cannabis and oil or Idrasil prescribed by your doctor are great ways to alleviate the symptoms of opioid detox.
So we left you in 2004. So let's progress with that story to what happened in 2005.
So by 2005, I had found one of the few doctors in Los Angeles that began writing recommendations for cannabis. Back in 2005, we're only 9 years after the Compassionate Act use of 1996, Senate Bill 420, and Health and Safety Code 11367.5. Even at that time, in those early days, there were very few doctors recommending medical cannabis. So as an Orange County resident, I had to go to Los Angeles, and I found a physician. And it was kind of funny, after I got my recommendation, after 2 hours of talking with this doctor, as a physician's son, I asked what I'm familiar and used to asking: where do I get this recommendation? I'm thinking of it as a prescription filled,
right?
Like at a pharmacy.
Yeah.
And he chuckles and says, "Yeah, I can't help you with that." And he says, "But some patients tell me that out in the lobby on the coffee table, there's a stack of magazines, and somebody said that in the bottom magazine in the back there's a piece of paper there, and you might want to take a look." And sure enough, next to that stack of magazines was a notepad and a pen, and I wrote down a couple of addresses on that piece of paper and put it back and was on my way. And next thing I knew, I found myself in one of the seedier sections of Santa Monica Boulevard, where
Steele, at that point, what was the state of the cannabis industry in the state of California? Was it recreational use, or what was the, compared to then to what it is now?
Well, then, and at that time, it was only medical.
Okay.
And it was strictly medical. So the supply sources at the time were supposed to be through collective groups of patients,
right,
under 12, numbers of 12. So the idea of going to a commercial location where some people were running a business selling cannabis to those who had valid recommendations and an ID and cash was as rough as you could imagine.
Yeah. That was you coming from a physician's son, thinking you're going to go to Walgreens or whatever the medical place is out in California. Is that had to be a rude awakening, but one I'm sure that you saw some relief there. So you were gonna go through that process to get it.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, they were nice guys, and you've got to respect any entrepreneur who is.
Steele, was it?
That stepping out early in the days of an emerging industry.
Absolutely.
So I really respected their entrepreneurial spirit, and given the way they had to go about handling their business with redundant layers of security and paranoia, I understand that.
Yeah.
So
is it fair to say at that
point
point?
On the path by 2005 of seeking safe access for myself in Orange County, of which it just didn't exist. And as a business owner, entrepreneur, I put together a dispensary collective, and I ran it out of my house for a period of time. And we started cultivating cannabis in our garage, and it grew really quickly. By 2007, we had 2 grow houses, and we had a dispensary in each of the 5 counties in Southern California, and we were delivering daily. So business was thriving.
So you had a business, and that was taking care of your medical need as well at that point. What was
100%? What
was the licensing? 100%. Was there licensing available for the business that you had at that time?
There wasn't. The way the legal landscape was at the time was compliance. So as a law student and as a person who the last thing I wanted was to get in any trouble, run afoul of any laws, I was hyper compliant. I was doubly redundant about everything that I did. And if I thought that a person's paperwork wasn't legitimate, or if I thought that their use wasn't legitimate, we actually would leave, and we would flag that person and not go back, let them find another source. So we really were able to develop a class of patients that were not only very appreciative of our service, but truly ill persons that if I ever did get in trouble, at least I had a patient base that nobody could say wasn't a legitimate patient base.
Right.
That none of my patients didn't have an actual need for their medical cannabis.
Right. You weren't selling just for recreational purposes. You were selling to those people that really needed it for a health reason.
I had a patient in San Diego who was 21 years old at the time. He was a quadriplegic. He came up to Orange County once a month with his caregiver in a van, and he had to use the sipper mechanism to move his electric wheelchair because he was so severely paralyzed. And he also was waiting for a kidney. So each month he would come to me and he would buy an ounce, of which at that time was very expensive. And he also asked me if I had an oral form that he could take to get the cannabinoids into his stomach instead of having to eat or mess with flour.
Right.
So I made an oil preparation using coconut oil. I just extracted the cannabis and I floated it in coconut oil. It was black, and I filled it into double-aught gel caps. And I made 25 or 30 of those each month for this particular patient. I'd been doing this for nearly a year for this patient, and at one point he came to me. Actually, this was about 3 or 4 months before we got indicted on October 31st of 2007, which is really kind of the pivot point in this whole story. This particular patient asked me if, because he was on the Transplant Center of Maryland's list,
right,
waiting for a kidney, the center had an insurance mechanism. And the patient asked me if I would take their check to reimburse me or pay me for his medical cannabis. And I couldn't believe that. That actually blew my mind.
So this was a check from the insurance company.
I called him a week later and said, sure. And I got a QuickBooks program, and I printed up invoice 0001. And he came next month, and I gave him his medicine and the invoice, and about 3 weeks later, it came in the mail from the Transplant Center of Maryland, a check for the full amount of the invoice.
Wow.
And I couldn't believe it. And that's the way I took care of that patient until October 31st of 2007.
So that is that's a big date in the timeline of what happened in your life from 2001 to 2020 is this Halloween 2007. So Steele, I want you to be aware we're close to where we need to take a pause for the radio show. So I'm gonna pause it right there and then come back, and we're gonna continue with that story. So for those that are listening on the radio show, we're gonna say adios at this point. For those that are watching and listening on podcast, watching on YouTube, hang on. You've been listening to Charles Musgrove with Answers That Count, and we've got Steele Smith III from California. He's telling his personal story about the development of a medical cannabis drug for those that are suffering for many different reasons, but including the withdrawal and the detox symptoms from opioids. So hang on. We'll be right back. I'm Charles Musgrove, host of Answers That Count. Steele, let's continue with that. So tell me what happened on October 31st, 2007. That's when there was a raid. Was that by the DEA, or what? What was the raid about in 2007?
Yes, on the early morning of October 31st, the DEA kicked in our door, sprayed our 2 Sharpay with a fire extinguisher, and put laser dots on the heads of my wife and I in our bed.
Wow.
And proceeded to tear our house apart.
That had to be, I guess, to say that it's frightening. That's an understatement to say that was would have been intimidating.
Yeah, that was to say the least.
So now you go from dealing with providing this medical marijuana, for a medicinal purpose, to now you're in a legal battle. So my guess is at this point, based on what you said, that a lot of this is uncharted territory.
It is, and at least I was somewhat prepared to the extent that I had some money secured to mount legal battles, and I had counsel retained, and I was at least able to mount my own defense, of which ended up taking 10 months of me being locked up in level 5 maximum security in the Metropolitan Detention Center in downtown LA.
Wow.
Then being released on a bracelet for a year. And the case didn't conclude until 2012.
2012. So what once you got out of the county jail, were you able to? How did you live as far as making money for yourself? And I guess equally important, how were you able to obtain the cannabis for medical purposes for your own need?
So the irony of that is that, yeah, I still needed medical cannabis, and the show must go on. So because I was the first in the state of California to be approved by a federal judge to present a medical defense in a federal court hearing against a marijuana defendant, I was in a unique position to fight the case. And this particular raid that occurred on October 31st was 47 facilities up and down the state of California, over 1,000 persons. Each collective had multiple defendants, and every single other indictment had multiple counts. So my indictment was only 2 counts: cultivation and conspiracy to cultivate. Every other indictment had other charges: guns, other drugs, tax evasion, you name it.
So that made yours seem like it was for a very good purpose. Not that you were indicted for a good purpose, but the purpose of your business and what you were doing was purely to provide that cannabis on a medical purpose to the patients that needed it.
And the judge saw that.
Yeah.
Very clearly, which is why, and the prosecutor understood that, which is why our case kept getting postponed. If I remember correctly, there were 23 to 24 postponements over those 5.5 years. And in the end, the case was dismissed positively.
Interesting. So I guess the good thing is it was ultimately dismissed in a positive way, but it hung over your head for that long period of time as well.
It did. It was very disruptive, and in a strange way, looking back on it, when you asked about how I was able to get my medicine during that time, honestly, I set up shop again and continued to operate my business, because in my mind, I hadn't violated any California state laws, and my business was legal under California state law. And the fact that I was being raided by the federal government and it was contradictory to federal law was a 10th Amendment issue.
Interesting. So during that time, you were obviously not on the opioids at that time. So the reason you were taking that medical cannabis was your original diagnosis of the Crohn's disease that was discovered in 2001.
100%. That
Right.
was the only way that I could and can maintain my ZE.
Right.
Crohn's.
Interesting. So were you raided again once you opened back up, or you started the growing the marijuana again and selling that again? Were you raided again?
We were raided in October of 14, again in October of 15, and a third time, or actually a fourth time, if you count the first, in October of 16. And each time they just destroyed our facility and took everything. And the third time was actually kind of interesting, because the agents knew who I was and what we were doing, and their annual clip of raiding us in October almost was expected by the 2016. And it was kind of funny because that time they knocked on the door instead of breaking the door, and we let them in and allowed them to conduct their business. And out of respect for them and that they have to do their job and that I have nothing to say about it, it was about noon at that time. And my wife and I went around all the agents with a pad of paper and a pen and asked them how they wanted their burgers and fries and what soda they'd like. And we went to the local burger place and bought, I think, 18 combo meals and fed the entire DEA team. Half of them were young scouts, probably their first grade ever, right fresh out of the academy. DEA probably doesn't take scouts to meth and heroin raids because those guys shoot back.
Right.
So they took them to the raid from Steele because they know that, not only am I not armed, I'm very passive towards the law enforcement. I understand and respect their duty, and they have to eat.
Right.
So half the girls were actually crying that we were being so gracious while they were destroying patients' medicine.
Wow. That's quite a story. So that's surprising to me that was in 2016. I thought the laws had evolved dramatically through that period of time, and you would not be raided because you're basically doing the same thing and you're providing medical cannabis to medical patients.
Well, thank you for saying that. And, at the end of the day it's not personal with the agents. It's all about money, right? The asset seizure laws allow for the DEA to seize assets, and that's a revenue stream. And any revenue stream that can be seized with minimal force back, return force, with minimal effort, is a good day in business.
You're an easy target. So, you not only was there minimal force, you offered them hamburgers and French fries on the last visit. So was that? So it sounds like, and I'm really not that educated in the laws of the land with that, but the feds were raiding you, not the state law enforcement. So you were not violating any state laws, but it was a federal law that they were at least charging you with. Is that correct?
Correct. Each time it was a full-blown, tacked-out DEA raid squad with all the tools in their arsenal.
So what is no
joke.
The obvious question is, after those 4 raids, you said the disposition of the one from 2005, or 2007. What is the disposition of those other raids? Or do you still have charges that are outstanding, or what's the status of those?
No, that's the irony. There were never any charges filed in those subsequent 3 raids.
Really? They just seized
raids.
Assets. Wow. So they just seized assets.
I still had an open case with the judge. I can safely assume that the DEA sent reports over to the judge and said, hey, this guy's still in business and we've just raided him again. Do you want to add additional charges? And additional charges were never added.
Interesting. So
you can draw your own conclusion. The actions always speak louder than words.
Absolutely. So I guess
the actions there were no additional charges ever.
So I guess since 2016, every October, you kind of are on pins and needles. So we're nearing the end of October 2020, and you haven't been raided yet. So since you haven't been raided since 2016, you're probably good for a no raid in 2020. Is that the expectation?
Yes. At this point, I absolutely do not expect any raids. I have filed DEA Form 225 with the DEA. I'm one of the first registrants seeking application under DEA 1A. We are a fully compliant facility that's under new construction, and our counsel is retired AUSA for the Central District of California, who has a working relationship, having been a government official himself, and an understanding with the agency such that we actually want to be their partner. We actually want to work with the DEA as prohibition comes to its finality across the country. The DEA has to move within its charter as an agency from enforcement to regulation. And when you're used to working with a sledgehammer and you have to learn how to work with a tack hammer, that can sometimes be a little bit cumbersome process.
Right.
So we want to work within that process. We want to facilitate that process. And of course, I want to be the first through that process.
Well, good. So right now you have a new facility under construction. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And the anticipated completion date of that new facility is when?
End of this year.
Okay, so end of 2020, and like we had said before, you have developed the pill form of the medical cannabis, and that's with Idrasil. Tell us again the website on that for those because we said that at the beginning of the show.
Thank you. Idrasil.
Idrasil.
Yes, sir. IDRASIL. Idrasil.
Idrasil.com. So you can go to Idrasil and pre-order from that website. Is that correct?
Just click the pre-order button from the homepage.
Okay, outstanding. So, Steele, that's quite a story, and we started this in 2001 all the way up to 2020. I know there's some details that we did not go through, but the proof of concept, I believe you said that was back in 2016, and then in 2019 we did see a further evolution of the medical cannabis laws. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. And our president has done a great job eliminating a lot of regulation at the FDA level, expanding orphan drug regulations, and allowing for the study of new molecules.
Excellent. We appreciate that plug for President Trump. So he has done a lot to deregulate different industries. So it's good to hear that he's done that in this industry as well. So, Steele, this has been a pleasure. Anything else you'd like to add to the show? This is, like I said to start with, this is a show like none other, and we appreciate you going through this. This is very personal to you, but it's a great story. It's another story of an entrepreneur's success and the origins of that, and what really gave you the boost in that was personal tragedy. So nobody likes to have personal tragedy, but the good thing is how you have used that to not just help yourself and overcome it yourself, but how it's going to help how many countless people out there that are suffering pain that really need this medical marijuana assistance.
Yes, out of the ashes riseth the phoenix.
Absolutely. Steele, God bless you. This is going to help a lot of people, and I think you had said that earlier in the show too. So somebody up there, the good Lord is watching over you to get you in this place, and we're thankful for that, and I know a lot of people are as well. So, Steele, thank you so much for joining us on Answers That Count. I am your host, Charles Musgrove. Check us out on all the favorite podcast channels, YouTube. Click on it for subscription and notification. We're out there on Amazon Fire and Roku TV as well. So thank you again. Have a great day. Have a blessed week. Peace.
Answers That Count is brought to you by the Bean Team. For all your business accounting needs, visit beanteam.com for more info. You can listen to more episodes of Answers That Count on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and iHeartRadio, or visit AnswersThatCount.com.